Okay. I just wanted to come on and visit with you for a minute, kind of just share some thoughts that I had. I was part of a women's circle this morning that meets bi-monthly, and our conversation today was so inspiring in so many ways that I wanted to come on and share some things that were occurring to me that felt really powerful. So welcome. My name is Asia Rain. And I am moving further and further into empowering and living my role and my purpose here on the planet. And part of that is coming forward and sharing things that are coming in and through me. And, just as a courage advocate and as a mentor and as somebody that has survived an incredible amount of trauma and ritual abuse in her life, there's some things that I feel like as I've gone through that healing process and come out on the other side that I know would be so beneficial to help and share with other people. So I'm not necessarily going to be talking about the trauma. I'm looking at reflections. I wanted to kind of pop in here and ask you, how was your 2022? How do you feel about what it is that your life reflected to you, that you lived? Did you live it well? Did you find places that you weren't so satisfied with? Are there things that you're definitely leaving behind, things that are coming forward for you? And I actually posed a question the other day. It was, what ashes is your phoenix rising from? Like, what have you burned down, or what are you looking at that you've made some really critical choices around, or you can feel yourself moving towards at some point really soon? And I think there are some really, like many of us are looking at where we've been, what we've done, what was presented, and how last year really kind of formed for us. And maybe there's a little bit of dissonance there, and it's not feeling so good. And there's other things that we can really champion ourselves in, and maybe we're not quite joining our own parade. Maybe we need to do that. So in this place that we actually are in this way that we're actually living, I was looking at some of the things I can count as a success and some of the things that I know that I need to move forward with a little bit more, and things I need to step away from. And so part of what was inspiring to me was really looking at where I am on the other side of a healing process. And the truth of this is the only way to get on the other side of something that is very painful or very confusing is kind of twofold. You need to sit with it, and you need to move into it and then through it. And really the only way to see what's on the other side is to get on the other side. So I was thinking about some of the things I'm not too proud of, some of the things that I've let burn down, rising out of shame, rising out of role playing perfectly, rising out of control aspects, rising out of those things that really are have accompanied my life, accompanied like the trauma response, way of living, adaptation, that kind of thing. But just even being a victim that is actually pulling in and responding to and has very well adapted to that role, and then gets blind to it. You don't even see it there as you responding to things as a victim. And so you're caught in that triangle of victim, villain, or savior, and that becomes really appealing or habitual, because there's ways to not own what's going on. You can actually off-put it. You can put it off onto somebody else, or you can jump in and enable and rescue somebody else so that you feel better about it. You can identify villains. You can, like identify yourself as deserving, whatever that is. And it's really important as you're going through your own self-recognition to step in and identify where you are. Are you in that cycle? Is that where you are to be, are you really, is it appealing to you? Are you liking identifying as a victim? Although that sounds a little weird, you can decide if you're actually identifying as a victim, if you're habitually blaming outside circumstances or others for what's going on in here. And although that's a great mirror to show you what's going on, the flip side of that is to come in and ask yourself, why is that triggering me? Why is that bothering me so much? And not necessarily dismissing it right away. It's like, well, it's because, and then you just have this answer. Really sitting with it, sitting with that uncomfortability is going to be one of the ways to move through to get to the other side. So the advice that I have, the things that I've done to work through some really big situations, big things like anger, big things like shame, deep things like pain and fear and control. For me, a lot of times it came out as control. I want to control the situation so I feel safe. Hyper vigilant in controlling a situation so I feel safe. So really, really being in a maturity about what you're doing is to sit with it and not identify it. You don't have to identify it. You have to feel it. You have to feel all of the anxiety, the anxiousness, the anger, the disharmony and the injustice of what that is. And nobody gets to say how long that gets to last. Neither do you. This is something that as you're really trusting yourself and working through this, you need to sit in. You need to sit and kind of be really uncomfortable in the muck of what it is, because you've been wading through it, but you've been telling yourself it's not really there, or you've been blaming other people, the fact that it is there or whatever. So stepping into more of a mature space of owning your shit, basically owning your stuff, owning that space, owning the muck isn't easy. I'm not here to tell you that it's an easy thing, and I'm not here to tell you that it's going to like instantly be cleared out either. When you step into this space of really moving into a maturity and releasing some things and letting all of that burn down so you can rise out of it, there's going to be some fallout. There's going to be some experiences that are really uncomfortable, but you do need to sit in it, sit in this uncomfortability, get comfortable with being uncomfortable in here, right? Instead of trying to project it out, and journal with it, like write things down, like give yourself permission to voice really strange things that may sound a little bit off or a little bit like, I don't know where that came from, but just keep writing it, like let it be there and fully experience your emotions. And again, the tendency is to try and solve the problem. Well, I feel this way because, well, naturally I'm going to feel this way because. It's like, sure, write that down, but that's not the answer, nor is it the solution. The faster you move to that space of this is why is actually pretty indicative of how quickly you want to not see it. Like, let's just get it solved so I can move on with my life. That comment I hear so often. I just want to get on with, being normal, or get on with being, living my life. And that's actually a bit of bypassing. So being honest with yourself, taking a breath, doing some things that are tactile to allow yourself to get uncomfortable and stay in that uncomfortability and really see what's there, starts bringing in the wholeness of you, the whole parts of you, the stuff that you've been ignoring, the inner child parts that might get a little bit courageous and start to talk and own what that is. And you might start seeing that it's not an adult part of you that's talking, it's a child part of you that's talking. Inner child work is something that I have found is one of the best things you could possibly do for yourself. And it is something that I'm going to be bringing forth a course on, and really kind of helping educate people on how that, to me, is the key of how you get to know yourself. Because as you get to know yourself, then you really know how to orient yourself in the world, and you remove yourself more and more from that victim, villain, rescuer triangle. And you stop demonizing others, and you stop demonizing yourself, and you stop, blaming, and you stop running into and trying to jump into places to rescue, or you looking for a savior, looking for a rescuer. So in that space, really being kind and understanding with yourself is pretty important. The thing that came forward for me today in that women's circle that I wanted to share with you is a very emotional thing for me. During the years that I was healing from, during the years of being in therapy and healing from the ritual abuse that I experienced in my lifetime, prior to stepping into healing. So that would be a good 37 years of being accessed, being born into satanic ritualized situation, familial, coming into the family, and then being passed off into up to religious leaders, high level leaders. Didn't matter which religion. There was the Mormon Church. There was also the Catholic Church. I had experience with some a lot of mind control stuff and MK Ultra, and then I also had experience with human experimentation and human trafficking. Like, there's a really long list. It all gets packaged into a big area that needs to be addressed, dug into, kind of unwound, deprogrammed. So as I was in that process, there was a really long time that I was actually very, very engaged, not just in going to the therapy sessions that lasted anywhere from an hour to 2 hours. Typically it was 2 hours. But what I would do is I would come home and process, and my processing consisted of actually sitting down and writing it and re-listening to it and that kind of thing. And what I was looking back at was this period of time that lasted almost 9 years, I would say a good 9 years of my life and of the lives of my children and of my spouse also at the time. I was the individual, I was the mother and the partner that they got to experience in a healing space. That didn't mean it was pretty. It was really, really ugly sometimes. It was very disorienting. It could be very painful. I had to, really bring forward a lot of emotions, a lot of latent and repressed memories and feelings and emotions. But I also had to parent that. I had to be in charge of that. I had to own that. And it wasn't for my children to process with me, and it wasn't for my husband at the time to process with me. That was mine. So I also had to navigate how I was relating and everything. And so I just remember, though, I would write these things down and I would process in the evenings, and my children had this years of watching their mom go through it, but then also relating to me in that. And they got to see vulnerability, and they got to see what it was like for an adult to really do her best and also be faulty and human and all of those things. But there was a sacred time with it. They would come into my office at night and ask questions. They could feel the energy of what was there. And I would say sometimes it was me crying and other times it wasn't. There was just a reverence that was there, and they liked to be in that space. But they did feel like they could be heard. And I felt like in my life, it was so important. I never felt heard as a child that I wanted to hear them. So I did put things aside and I listened to them the best I could. I wasn't perfect at it. And a little while later, after I was kind of through that and I was moving through post-divorce and all of this, I was reflecting on those years that I was a mother in recovery, and mother in, reliving, a mother in really pulling forward all of my experiences in therapy. And I began to mourn. I began to mourn for the mother that I wasn't for my children. I began to mourn for them because they should have had a different kind of mom. I began to really feel the heaviness of what I thought a good mom should be that I wasn't. And the shame that I was loading on top of myself because I couldn't be that person and I wasn't that person had to be sat with. I had to sit with this for a very long time because I thought I had failed. It's hard to have an ideal that you want to live by that you don't measure up to. And yet those ideals are very subversive, or they're also unconscious, and maybe you don't know that they're really there. And maybe they weren't even set by you. Maybe they were set by society, or they were set by your family, or something else that you admire. But I know that was playing into it too. And I finally got to a point where I asked myself, well, what exactly is a good mom? Like, what does a good mom do? And I just let myself free write on this. And some of those things were really, it was funny, almost comical, because I was like, oh, that's not what I think a good mom is. It was things like, I should be quilting for every child, and I should be canning all of this stuff, and I should be, like sewing clothes. And I just looked at that and I went like, that was never my intention. How weird that is my definition of a good mom, because that was my grandma's good, that's what my grandma did. That was my mom's definition of a good mom. And I felt all this generational assumptions and, like things that I should be doing coming through. And I'm like, that was never my desire. Like, I'm a good mom because, and then I had my own list of what a good mom does and what a good mom is or should be or whatever. And I began to rework this list that I didn't even know was subconsciously inside of me. And there was some healing that came around that was so powerful for me. In the meantime, it didn't solve the problem that I wasn't necessarily present for my kids as this happy-go-lucky mother at night that read to them and put them to bed with, a song and a glass of water or something like that. And it's okay that it wasn't. It was actually okay that I was exactly where I needed to be. And I think that's what I want to bring forward is like, we're exactly where we need to be. We are brilliant souls. We are putting ourselves and guiding ourselves in the most exquisite way to the most perfect place that we can navigate and be. And this is why we don't heal in isolation. This is why we come together and we reflect off of each other. And if we can pull ourselves out of a victim mentality for a moment, at least, because somebody else's reflection helps see that we were like really being pinged as a victim. Not to say that we weren't victimized. That doesn't marginalize that at all. It's just our reaction to it and our perception of it and how that's all coming forward. The self-evaluation isn't so that we can self-degrade. The self-evaluation is there so that we can actually receive different perceptions and see what is really where we are and the truth of where we are and how that kind of comes through our own perception and how we see the world. And are we okay with that? Like, being conscious about the way you perceive your own world is so critical. When you hear other people talk about, being awake, being aware, are you conscious, are you not, that kind of thing, it's not then an out there thing. It's really self-awareness. It's really moving yourself into a sovereignty. And if you're not used to doing that, it's going to be an exercise. And it's also going to be full of things that you're not happy about, and you are going to mourn. And you get to mourn and you get to sit in that. And then you get to actually kind of heal from that and rest from that and take a bath because of that and all of the other things that are full of that. But our vulnerability is critical. Self-vulnerability is really amazing. And then bringing God into this. I can't even tell you how liberating it was when I realized that I could be vulnerable to God. I didn't have to perform for God or to God, and I didn't have to respect him in a particular way, or he wouldn't hear me, like in a way that's very, again, isolating. It's kind of ridiculous. You push yourself away from God because if you can't like orient yourself right and present well, then he's not going to hear you. That's dumb. And it's such a false overlay is really what I'm trying to say. Once I realized that I could actually be this little human, a soul in a human, having a human experience that gets to throw a tantrum to God, that was great. Because if God couldn't handle my little tantrums, what kind of God was that? What God was I trying to relate to? It made no sense. So I freed myself of this idea of having to perform a particular way to be heard by God, stepped into the role of knowing that I could be held by God in a complete meltdown, in a fit where I'm blaming him for everything, where I get to let all of that come out, knowing that that's not disrespectful, knowing that he could listen, knowing he can hold me in that pain and that sorrow and all of those things. Let that actually exit my being. And you know how when kids have like their tantrums, they finally settle down and they sit there and they maybe need a nap, or they're just like all of a sudden like, wow, where'd that come from? That was a lot of emotion I just totally like expressed. And then they're ready to talk. Then they're ready to listen and they're ready to receive. I was able to be held in those ways so much. It changed my relationship with myself and with God immensely. And suddenly there were things that I was able to see and feel and hear and receive, not only from myself, but from God. I was no longer marginalizing myself. I was able to sit and and kind of mourn things I thought should be, and then realize I only thought they should be, and then realize how perfect they were. And also really give a lot of accolades and credit to the people that were in my family, my children and my ex-husband, in the places that they were at the time, living the life that they were living with me, and me living my life with me. It was very, very liberating. And so I just want to come in and I would just want to ask you again, like, what are the ashes that your own phoenix is rising from? Where are you coming out of? What is it that you have done courageously that burns something down, that on the other side of this, you're beginning to emerge and look at? And give yourself some credit for that. Look at that very, very honestly and revisit it. Know that you might have to burn a number of things down to actually rise fully. Know that what you're getting on the other side of, you have to go through to get to the other side. Then you could look back and see what that is. You might have a goal of what it should be, but it's still a should be. You won't know until you're there, and you only there when you're there. You're there, you're now, you're here. Keep moving, keep going. It's so worth it. You can do it. And I'm here to attest to that. And I just wanted to share that with you. And if you've got any questions, put some in the comments below. And I would love to have this conversation further with you. So anyway, have a wonderful day and would love to hear from you more later. Thanks.